Thank you for your introduction. Thank you for honoring me by asking me to say a few words here. Thank you, President Joel, for your words. I never had the privilege of working very closely with Yitzhak Rabin, although I've been in public service for 25 years. I did work, however, closely with Shimon Peres when I was a young diplomat back in the early 90s and had the opportunity to spend time with the Prime Minister during what was probably the highlight of his second term when he came to Washington, D.C. on September 13th, 1993 to sign the Oslo Accords, and we then went back to Israel. On the way, we made an historical stop with the King of Morocco, and shortly thereafter, I left to Los Angeles to hold my first overseas posting, where several months after I arrived, we hosted Yitzhak Rabin in November of 1994. After it was announced that he won the Nobel Peace Prize, he came to Los Angeles. What was his last visit to Los Angeles. And so I had the opportunity to spend time with him in two very important events. And I'd like to share with you some of my thoughts. You know, we talk about Rabin's legacy. What was so special about him? Why was he so unique? I'd like to share with you some of my thoughts, again, based on my very random and sporadic encounters with him. The first thing that made him extremely unique, and I think well-liked by all Israelis, is the fact that he answered the call from a very young age. He was the epitome of the term responsibility. And he was all about giving to the collective, being part of the collective, answering the call. And if you just look at his own biography, at the age of 25, he became the commander of the Harel Brigade that fought in the greater Jerusalem area. He was one of the youngest, he wasn't the youngest, but one of the youngest IDF chiefs of staff. He was the first Sabra to be a prime minister, 1974. And everything he did was about serving the public. Everything he did was about giving to the collective. He was not a taker, he was a giver. And he was not afraid of assuming responsibilities, even in the face of catastrophes and failures. And I think that's one thing that made him really special. People liked him because of that. The second thing about him that you could see, even from my point of view as a junior diplomat, his authenticity. He was a real human being. Very transparent. Very transparent. There was no hidden agenda. You could see, for example, that he did not feel comfortable on stage. He did not feel comfortable among people. He was a very shy, I would dare to say even introverted human being, but very real. Spoke his mind. When he felt something, he said it. And again, this kind of transparency, which I believe, by the way, today is the new emerging type of political charisma. This is a subject, President Joel, for research, for social and political research. I believe that there's a new political charisma emerging today in the world. It has a lot to do with the influence of technology, that is expecting the political leader to be more transparent, to be fair. And Rabin was, in his core, a decent, honest, fair human being. And I think, again, that's why people liked him. Another thing that made him extremely unique and likable is the fact that he was, and again, maybe it's a result of the two factors that I mentioned before. He was a pragmatist in the sense that he was not afraid to say, I made a mistake. I changed my mind. Circumstances have changed. And he was not afraid of doing those things. And I think in that sense, he was a student of David Ben-Gurion. Because you see, in policy making and decision making, whether you run a big corporation or you run a country, or you run a political movement, you always have to find the balance between risks and opportunities. Right? In Hebrew we say sikuim mul sikunim. And if you emphasize the opportunity in an extreme way, you increase the level of risk, and vice versa. If you emphasize the risk in an extreme way, you could possibly bring about a paralysis. And Rabin was very careful to make sure, and I think he himself was the embodiment of this balance between understanding in a very profound way Israel's security needs, but also looking at the same time for the opportunity to allow Israel to grow. And I think when you look at all those combinations, he was the first, for example, to put on the table the conversation about Iran's nuclear ambitions back in the 90s. He was the chief of staff that reunited Jerusalem. People don't remember that about him. But he was the Ramatkal, chief of staff in 1968, the famous Haratzofim speech, which he gave with the Hebrew U when he was awarded the honorary doctorate. And the last thing about him, which again is not so publicly discussed, his true concern to the Jewish nature of the State of Israel. That's something that is kind of lost in the discussion about Yitzhak Rabin. Here's an interesting piece from his biography. Yitzhak Rabin was born in 1922. Where? In Jerusalem, although he never lived in Jerusalem. His parents did not live in Jerusalem. Why was he born in Jerusalem? His mother, whose nickname was Red Rosa, was a socialist leader. She decided that she wanted her son to have in his birth certificate Jerusalem. So she left the Galilee 3 weeks before her due date, and went to Jerusalem. She traveled to Jerusalem. It was not an easy journey for her. And gave birth to Yitzhak Rabin in Jerusalem, although he was raised in Tel Aviv. And when he was asked about what was his motivation to engage in the political process with the Palestinians, whom he never trusted, by the way, he said that his concern, he was afraid, his fear as a prime minister, to be forced to choose between being a democracy and a Jewish state. He deeply and profoundly cared about the Jewish nature and the Jewish identity of the only Jewish state in the world. And the fact that his mother did what she did to allow him to be born in Jerusalem was a very meaningful thing for him throughout his entire life. So I thank all of you for inviting us to say a few words here at this very important event. I know that people are listening to us over the internet. I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank President Joel for sponsoring this event. And God bless you all. Thank you so much.